You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. Hey, what's going on everyone? Welcome to episode 107 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. After a few weeks off, I'm happy to be sharing a first step this week. Many months ago, my friend Rye, who shared his first step on episode 26, recommended that I talk to Andrew C. for the podcast. Just about a month ago, we recorded his first step on my Zoom channel, and we also had a few others from Andrew's meetings to join us. I had originally intended for this episode to be released a few weeks ago, but I've had a lot of things going on that have taken an emotional toll on me, and I've been able to share at my meetings, but I'm not going to share anything here on the podcast at this time. All is well, just emotionally taxing. So instead of working on the podcast, I've been taking a break and vegging out. I've been somewhere between self-care and avoidance, but I am back to working on the podcast. At the end of this episode, I'll be sharing an update about the podcast schedule for the next month and talking about a few things shared in the recording of Andrew's first step. And speaking of that, Andrew is a minor attracted person and is part of a special interest intergroup called the Fellow Travelers Recovery Intergroup, and I wanted to read a few things from their website, ftrecovery.org. Hello and welcome to the Fellow Travelers Recovery Group, an intergroup of Sex Addicts Anonymous with special interest recovery meetings for minor attracted persons, MAPS. Note, our meetings are not exclusively for MAPS. Any individual wanting to stop addictive and compulsive sexual acting out may attend our meetings. However, they must maintain a safe, confidential space for MAPS to share. Skipping down a little. Our meetings are closed to observers. That means you must be an adult 18 years of age and older with a desire to stop addictive, compulsive sexual behavior. Newcomers are welcome to our meetings. Our meetings are intended to provide minor attracted people with a safe space to share their experience, strength, and hope with one another as we walk the path of recovery. Whatever the nature of your struggle, if you feel our meetings could be a safe place for you to share, you belong here. No member list. Due to the special nature of MAP meetings, we do not have a publicly accessible or shared contact phone list. However, group members frequently provide their contact information during our meetings, and you are free to share your contact information privately in the chat. Do share your story at meetings. We understand that it may take you some time to become comfortable enough with our group members to share your own story. Be sure to listen to other people's shares and offer your own when you are ready. What not to share. What is said and heard must remain in the room. While we do want our members to get current with their struggles and past and settled potential illegal behaviors, do not share any current illegal behaviors. While anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all 12-step fellowships, confidentiality is not legally protected in meetings with your sponsor, therapist, or recovery coach. If you are currently having issues, we encourage you to contact a person with whom you have privileged communication protections, such as a lawyer or clergy, noting that not all states honor privileged communication principles when it comes to actions involving minors. Revealing current, recent, or unreported illegal activities puts all attendees in a challenging position of either reporting such activity or being an accessory to criminal activity. Just don't do it. So, we will be talking about minor attraction issues in this episode. And at the beginning of the recording, Andrew does talk about his disclosure to law enforcement about his activities. And so it is cleared to speak about it here on the podcast. And I also wanted to mention that during the recording, it sounds like a squeaking fan or cricket chirps are being picked up by the microphone, which I could not filter out, but I did try. Also, toward the end of the recording, I added a few minutes of us talking after the official part of the recording was over. I thought it was podcast worthy, so I edited that part in with a swoosh transition so it didn't totally sound out of context. Anyway, I am now ready to turn it over to Andrew C. sharing his first step. Here it is. I hope you enjoy it. All right. Welcome everyone to the recording of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. And today we're honored to have Andrew C. share his first step. And we do have a few other people from Andrew's groups here listening in. And after the first step is over, we'll see if there is any comments that we want to include on the recording. So Andrew came highly recommended from my friend Rye, who has been on the podcast a few times. He recorded his first step on episode 26, and he was a guest on episode 51. And we were texting back and forth quite a few months ago. And he was asking if I would be interested in hearing Andrew's story. And I said, sure. And lately I have been backed up with scheduling different guests and stuff. So I'm finally glad that we're able to do this. And Andrew, I'm going to hand it over to you and hear your first step.
Thank you, Jason. It's definitely an honor to be here. I've been following this podcast since episode 1, so long-time
Nice.
listener and just really grateful to have this opportunity. Again, hey, everybody. Andrew C. I'm a grateful recovering sex addict, porn addict, and a codependent adult child. This is pretty much my first step to recovery. Before I begin my story, I would like to just let everybody know that all my actions depicted here tonight have been disclosed to law enforcement. So there is no need for any reporting issues or anything here tonight. I don't remember much about my childhood, but what I do remember is I was a very lonely child. Growing up, I struggled making friends and was bullied a lot in school. My father has been an alcoholic for as long as I can remember. When he would drink, he would get emotionally and verbally abusive, which resulted in me being primarily raised by my mother, who was very protective and controlling of me. This resulted in me in living a very sheltered life. Because I didn't have many friends, most of my free time was spent in my room playing by myself. Because of this, I developed just a strong skill to create my own fantasies in order to entertain myself and not feel so lonely. At this time, I was unaware of it, but I was becoming powerless over my fantasies. Around the age of 12, I discovered pornography for the first time when my dad gave me my first adult magazine. By the time I turned 13, I was masturbating multiple times a day. This would continue well into my adulthood. I was becoming powerless more and more over my newfound activity. At the age of 13, I was also experimenting with a friend down the street who was younger than me and his brother who was even younger than that by performing sexual acts on them and mutual masturbation, just the occasional, sex acts. We would often be in my room and I would show them the magazine my dad gave me, and we would often masturbate to these images. And this is also the time that I found sex tapes in my dad's closet that I would watch by myself and masturbate to. And taking all this and learning new things, I would then try to mimic the scenes depicted in the films with my friend and his brother, and they would come over. At this age, I was starting to notice that I was attracted to boys and girls, but more so boys my own age and younger, a lot younger. There were times when I would get home from school and knowing I had an hour and a half until my parents would get home from work, I'd go on the family computer and spend the time searching for adult porn and acting out. One day while searching the internet for cartoon type porn, which at that time was the only porn I knew of that was close to depicting minors my own age, and this had become a new fantasy for me, so it made me want to see young boys engaged in sexual acts. And after all, this was all legal, right? Well, in a trance of pure mental lust, just clicking away with the mouse, looking for that next thrill, that next hormonal rush of pleasure and dopamine, I stumbled upon a site that was solely underage models wearing inappropriate clothing, and boy, was I hit with an explosion. A rush so intense, I wanted more. Click, click, click went my mouse, and before I knew it, I was in the deep, deep dark web. This is the first time I remember ever viewing child sexual abuse material that would turn for the worst later in my life. I have planted what I know now, the seeds of an addiction. I also went through a phase of being obsessed with adult diaper porn, and all I could think about was that this is how I feel every time I get bullied in school. That would cause me to go through a stage of self humiliation, doing stuff by myself in the showers with cameras and everything else. All this was just to try and feel better about myself. This all became very strong sexual turn on for me and became the only thing I could think about. I found myself constantly indulging in sexual fantasy and replaying the acts I did to myself and my friends over and over in my head, and would countlessly masturbate until the point I was sore or could no longer ejaculate. I just could not get enough of it and wanted more. It is safe to say that by the time I would turn 16, masturbation and sexual fantasy had complete control over me as my quote, go to, end quote, way of escaping my reality. On top of all this, I was terrified that my parents would find all this out and I would be in huge trouble. Even more shameful was the fact that in their eyes, being same sex attracted is something to be shameful of and isn't, quote, normal, end quote. As I entered middle school and high school, I started dating, but it was limited to only seeing girls my own age in school since my mom didn't like me associating with the opposite sex. I realize now that my relationships were all just a cover up of me being gay. At this age, I would also have been in the longest relationship I would ever have with a girl that lasted from seventh grade to ninth grade. I eventually broke up with her in the ninth grade because I found out she was cheating on me. This in turn lowered my self esteem and confidence even more. Throughout high school, I was involved in several monogamous relationships with girls, but would ultimately end the relationships telling them we were better off friends. But in reality, I wasn't sexually attracted to girls. After high school, I went to college out in Ohio. During the year and a half I was out there, my life consisted of not just going to school, but living a life of partying. I would eventually lose my virginity to a one night stand at the age of 20. Okay, well, maybe I'm bisexual, I was thinking to myself, because yet again, this event was a whole new level to me. Even though I wasn't a star student, I was still able to knuckle down and meet all the requirements to graduate and gave myself a sense of accomplishment as I was finally able to do something on my own without the help of my parents. After college, I got a job working in my field of study as a diesel mechanic. Around this time, my porn use was still strong. I was once again back on the same sites I was on when I was 13, viewing child sexual abuse material. I also found chat forums where I would trade links to file sharing apps and get newer and more explicit content. I thought I had hit the lowest point in my life, knowing that if I were to get caught, my life would be over. This constant fear of having this secret ultimately fueled the addict within just to find myself constantly downloading and deleting this stuff over and over again. No matter what I did to try to get away from it, I could not stop acting out with every chance I got. I would isolate myself from friends and family in order to get my fix. Around the age of 21, I met my now ex. At this time, I thought that I had finally found my way out and that after all, we were meant for each other. Over the course of a year, we would move in together. Financially, we struggled as I had lost my job and struggled finding work. Bills continued to pile up, and as everything was in my name, it drove me into debt, forcing us to move in with her mom, since my parents wanted nothing to do with her, and she wanted nothing to do with them. I felt forced to get along with her family, all the while wishing that she would just give mine a chance. There were times I would be emotionally and physically exhausted, but all she wanted from me was sex and money. I was being taken for granted, but could not see it at this time. In order to cope with all the stress, I would secretly act out the illegal pornography. Sometime in the year 2013, we would break up and I'd move back into my parents. After the breakup, I spiraled into feelings of guilt and shame. I felt as if I would never find anyone who I could spend my life with, and that I was a worthless human being. No matter what I do, I will never be good enough and will always be taken for granted. On top of all these feelings and emotions I was going through, I was also diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. With all this going on, the amount of time spent looking at pornography increased. I went from watching porn 3 to 4 hours a day to 8 or more hours a day, which caused me to lose a lot more sleep. I had thought I'd reached a bottom, but the worst was yet to come. A few years passed, and I eventually would end up meeting someone at a CD radio shop I used to hang out at and occasionally work at for some extra cash. We became close friends, and he introduced me to his entire family. We all became a close family. I felt as if I was finally accepted and a part of a family. Despite all of this, I was still actively engaged in compulsive use of illegal pornography. I was so wrapped up in my addiction that I constantly lied and manipulated the family so I could be around the boys. Over the course of 3 years, I groomed the one boy, buying him whatever he wanted, spending time with him, taking him places, all because I wanted to fulfill my sexual fantasy of wanting to have sex with an adolescent boy. The one night after consuming a ton of alcohol, marijuana, me and one of the boys had settled down to watch a movie, and everyone had gone to bed at this point. He fell asleep, and I took advantage and ended up taking pictures of his private areas just for my own pleasure. A new low in my life. Thought to myself, what am I doing? This is the one thing I told myself I would never do, and here I am doing it anyway. The thrill of the secret was so powerful that I could not resist any urge I had and acted out, looking at the pictures every chance I got. Then came a time where I was yet again making wrong decisions and was drunk and stoned in no condition to drive home. So I stayed the night again, but only this time it was the other boy who was with me, now watching a movie alone on the couch. Again, the addict kicked in and I took every advantage of this. I took the opportunity and ended up sexually molesting him when he at the age of 11 years old. This is it. I've officially crossed a line in which I told myself I would never do. Thought to myself that I was a monster. What made this even worse was the fact that it didn't stop there. It continued off and on over 2 years. Within this time frame, I would end up at one point where I no longer needed the drugs or alcohol to give me the courage to do these horrific acts. For the first time in my life, I felt so full of power that I viewed him as the same age as my inner child. That 13-year-old me who just wanted to feel loved by others. I made countless lies to myself to tell myself that what I was doing was okay, but deep down I knew it wasn't. I hated myself and just wanted it all to end. Then came the morning of February 19th, 2021, at approximately 6 a.m. I was pulled over after just leaving my house to go to work. I was ordered to get out of my car with my hands behind my head. Didn't know what was going on. I was placed in handcuffs and placed in the back of an unmarked police cruiser. It was at that time the detective approached the car and introduced himself as the detective from the Internet Crimes Against Children's Task Force. I knew right then and there I was officially caught. 13 years of acting out the illegal images of minors and suffering in silence was over. Alone and scared, I hit my rock bottom at the age of 29. Local and state police, along with the members of the Internet Crimes Against Children's Task Force and the prosecutor's office, raided my house on a search warrant, took all my electronics while I sat in the back of a police car, embarrassed and full of shame. They brought me to my local police station where I waived my rights and was interviewed by a detective. I admitted to everything: the porn, the pictures I took, the multiple sexual contacts I had with the one boy, all of it. I was processed and booked into county jail where I would spend the next 15 days. I had been indicted on 4 counts of endangering the welfare of a child. After being released and placed on pretrial home detention, I told my parents everything. They helped me find a certified sex addiction therapist who specialized in treating sex offenders. Even though I was not allowed to access the internet, it still didn't stop me from masturbating to euphoric recall and mental fantasy. I told my therapist this because I was afraid that this would lead me back down to the dark net, which would be a violation of my release conditions. He told me that I needed to get myself into a 12-step program for sex addicts called Sex Addicts Anonymous. Later on that night, I joined my first SAA meeting, and shortly after that, my life was changed forever. This is where my journey into recovery begins, and this is the part where I'm going to wing it a little bit here. Recently just had a relapse, so I'm back on. I got 29 days now. So wasn't a full-on blown relapse, but it was enough to reset my sobriety date after having 18 months of continuous sobriety. But I'm learning. It's part of the growth process. And if it wasn't for SAA and my sponsor and my entire support network from my therapist to my recovery coach, the person I am today wouldn't have been possible. I'm able to freely speak about my problems now, and I encourage others to do it. And that's me working my living amends, my ninth step on a daily basis. And yeah, with that, I'm grateful to have had this opportunity to share it, and knowing that one day I'll be there to help somebody just as somebody was there to help me is why I keep coming back. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Andrew. That was amazing. We do have a couple people here in the room, and I will get to them in just a minute. But yeah, opening up like that and especially in a public forum like this on the podcast is difficult. I have had issues talking about some of these types of things in the public domain. And the amount of things that I've heard from people that they've been able to connect with stuff that I've said, all of our guests that have been able to share things that we never thought we would share with anyone else in the world. When people hear that and they can realize that they're not alone, it is such an amazing gift. And just by sharing here, you make that possible for other addicts that feel like they're stuck, feel like they're the only ones ever going through this. So I really appreciate that. So many of the things that you talked about, I could remember, for myself with the child pornography that I've witnessed. For me, it didn't really start off with animation, but there is that aspect. And when you describe the adrenaline rush from that, yeah, I definitely know that. And as a voyeur, the issues that I've had when trying to spy on someone, the amount of adrenaline that fills my body, I know that feeling. I know that what I'm doing is wrong, yet I continue to look for that high. Yeah, so anyway, it was an amazing first step, and there are a few other people here in the room. You are welcome to use your name or an alias if you want to share here on the podcast, and anyone is welcome to chime in. And with that, we'll turn it over to John.
Hi, everybody. My name is John D. from Pennsylvania. I have had the pleasure of walking alongside Andrew through this journey as a person in long-term recovery myself in this program. And what Andrew, if hopefully he doesn't mind me saying this, what Andrew did not share is the amount of 12th step work that he does and carrying the message to others. He is a founding member of the Fellow Travelers Recovery Group, ftrecovery.org, which is an intergroup made up of meetings specifically for people with minor attraction or these kinds of issues. Now 5 meetings a week. He is a volunteer writer to incarcerated people at the Avenel prison in New Jersey near him. But we have writers all over the country that work with that group. But he has, I think, 2 sponsees in there. I have lost count of the number of people who he has sponsored or temporarily sponsored because he sees them come into the program and wants them to have a sponsor and someone to walk alongside them from day one. And I've lost count of the number of times where someone says in a meeting, I'm looking for a sponsor. And he says, I can't sponsor you forever, but I can get you started on your first step and help you work through that. So Andrew lives a life of service in this program. I've been in the program with him for a long time, and it is something he has done and has increased in his volume of doing that. And I'd also say that he listens and he hears and he receives support and feedback and takes it to heart better than anybody I've ever known in this program. He wants to hear the hard advice, the direct advice, and he takes it to heart, and he's not afraid to give that advice and hold himself and others accountable. And I think I was one of the first people he called after his recent relapse, and that's just proof that he knows this has happened. I got to surround myself with program people and surround myself with people who can help me and stand by me through this and help me through these things. So I just wanted to say how proud, and I think I speak on behalf of all of the leadership group and the trusted servants in Fellow Travelers when I say how proud we are of him. And thank you for sharing your story here, Andrew. It means a lot to us, and I think a lot of the listeners that listen to this podcast on the regular.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. Hopefully I can get some links from you guys for any of those meetings, the Fellow Travelers, etc., that I can put into the show notes for this. I have seen over the past year or so the amount of new meetings that are popping up that are specifically for minor attracted persons, MAP. And I am so grateful that these meetings are showing up and giving people a safe place to share. A lot of times, even within the rooms of SAA, it is difficult to talk about this kind of stuff, and having these special rooms available is an amazing thing. So anyone else here on this Zoom call want to chime in with anything?
Yeah, I guess I will. I just want to say that, I've known Andrew probably for around a good year. And I first started going to my first SAA meeting last year. I can honestly say that out of everything Andrew has been through, he motivates me. He's my inspiration. I've met so many people in the meeting that I go to, but the fact that he has put his work, his dedication, and he dedicated his whole life, sometimes his day, to SAA meetings, and that's something that's to be just proud of. He's like a video game character who finds all the meetings that he can go to. I want to be that person. You know what I mean? I really do, and I try to be that person. I'm one of those people that I've been going to meetings for a year. I don't have a sponsor, but I'm not trying to suck up to Andrew, but it's true. I'm just telling it like it is. Like all of us with this addiction, we've lost so much with this addiction. It's the worst addiction, in my opinion.
Hmm.
And, you lose everything. But I just want to say that if we all had the motivation survival mode like Andrew does, I think a lot of us would work pretty good. But that's what I'll basically say. With that, I'll pass.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Clark, and thank you, John. You guys got me crying over here in a good way. Appreciate you guys. It leads me to my one favorite quote that I have on a T-shirt that I ironically didn't wear tonight for some reason, but it says, "Addiction is giving up everything for that one thing. Recovery is giving up that one thing for everything."
Yeah.
And that's where I'm at right now.
Awesome. So one thing I didn't do at the beginning of this episode is ask you about your circles. And so we did hear basically what's in your inner circle here. And I was wondering if you wanted to share your middle circle, and then what you were talking about, giving up one thing for everything, looking at the outer circle, if there are things that you're doing to enrich your life besides doing the program and service work.
Yeah, I'll just go through all three of them.
Yeah,
Uh,
please do.
my inner circle that I have right now is no porn, no masturbation, using the social media, using YouTube to gain sexual gratification, keeping secrets about my sexual desires from my family, friends, therapists, sponsor, and recovery coach, grooming and manipulating children, grooming and manipulating others with the intent to act out or get inappropriate images or information, looking at any websites that depict any sort of nudity, using messaging apps for sexual purposes, using dating apps for other than the sole purpose of being in a committed relationship. For my middle circle, I have isolating myself, watching TV or movies that involve children, spending more than 3 minutes in a deviant fantasy without telling someone, not taking my meds or taking care of my health, not going to meetings, not reaching out or asking for help when in need of support. And then one thing I put in here that a lot of people don't understand is it's called a PIG, which stands for a problem of immediate gratification.
Hmm.
And then not following a pre-established safety plan when left at home alone for an extended period of time. And then my outer circle continues to grow every single day. It grows
Mhm.
with me, and that's the wonders of this program. So right now I like going fishing. I read books, SA books, ACA, any recovery book I could put my hands on, I read it. Working on cars, cutting my grass, cleaning up around the house, going for bike rides, going for walks, occasional video games here and there, spending time with my family and friends, putting model cars together, doing puzzles, any SA service work, being in a healthy, committed relationship, the practice of mindfulness meditation every single day, attending in-person meetings and attending recovery retreats. Like I said, that outer circle has grown quite a bit in like the past month and a half. So
Awesome. Yeah, it's the one circle that we love adding to. So having
yes,
the other circles, it's nice not to have to add more and more to those. But yeah, that outer circle is ever growing.
for me, my most important circle is my middle circle though, because
Yeah,
that's my warning signs.
yeah. A lot of people like to work the program through their middle circle. So far before you get to the inner circle. So it's a really good place to find all those warning signs. So I know you did mention going to retreats, and you guys have a retreat coming up in the on the East Coast.
Yeah, it's going to be September 8th through the 10th, and it's at a monastery in Paoli, Pennsylvania. Um,
Nice.
unfortunately, registration is all filled up now for it, but yeah, I'm lucky to go. I was able to go on a scholarship, and I'll be able to do service work while I'm there. And it's a 12 steps retreat for SLAA, but
Hmm.
it's it'd be nice, to go through all 12 steps in a weekend and, just get a basic understanding of what each step consists of, and then use that to further work my program and hopefully get through the sports step.
Yeah, I've listened to some recordings. Forget how long ago it was. The SAA convention. Someone did the 12 steps during the weekend, and it's really cool to just to be able to listen to those and just go through those steps really quickly. It's a good way to understand what the steps are and how they relate to each other, but you don't get the depth of working a solid step, but you get the brief understanding. And if you can get enough people to get through those steps, and then they can start helping out, sponsor others, like we were mentioning. I too love extending my hand out to people who are looking to get started on their first step, and I can't guarantee that I can sponsor through the rest of the steps, but I like to be there for the newcomers to help get them started with their steps. John, I noticed you posted a lot of information. This episode will air after the retreat is over, so
Yes.
but yeah, I do see another one that you posted there.
Yeah. The SLAA intergroup that encompasses the area that I live in and Andrew lives in does 4 retreats a year.
Oh, cool.
There is a men's retreat. So after this one, since this will air after that, there's a spring retreat March 1st to 3rd in the Allentown area of Pennsylvania. That is a men's only steps retreat. There's a women's steps retreat around the same time in central New Jersey. There's a conference type workshop retreat in June. And then there's a co-ed or all gender retreat in September. And that's the one that's coming up again. But those are annual events. I will make sure you have the link for the show notes.
Yeah.
Happy to do that. There are, I'm of course going to share about the retreats going on in our area, but there are of course retreats that intergroups and meetings do all the time. So
yeah. Lately, we've been posting information about an Orange County, Southern California retreat that is coming up at the end of September. One of my past guests, Mike, is going to be the speaker for that, and a future guest is also been sharing the links for that at some of my meetings. My annual retreat that I'm part of the retreat committee for here in the Bay Area, our retreat is usually in the middle of March. And so we, as a retreat committee, we start working on that in December. And I know a lot, how much work goes into putting on retreats like this. And I think, I can't remember what our totals were for this past year. It was, I think, about 174 people that showed. A couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, we had like 250, and it's just so amazing to be around other recovering addicts. It can be triggering for a lot of people, just because a lot of raw emotions are on display, but it is such a powerful thing. And I'm so glad that you guys brought it up before we started recording, and then you're going to actually be able to connect at that. And that's super awesome.
My personal experience, sometimes just listening to a meeting does the trick. I don't always have to share in every meeting I go to. Just being there and just listening helps.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the reasons I put the podcast together, is for people to be able to listen in to something that is similar to a meeting when they can't get to a meeting. Something that I listen to when I'm at work. I can go back and listen to past episodes when I'm not able to get to a meeting. But yeah, recently at work, I have just been so fucking busy that I just log in and plug in my headphones and have the camera off. And just to be able to hear other people's stories and shares is good enough to get me through the day. But I do have my home meeting that's in person that I get to share at every week. So grateful for
Tell you
that.
the truth, I've most recently discovered, and I'm going to add this to my outer circle, that when listening to the podcast and walking through nature on a hike, there's just something really calming and relaxing about it. It's like a whole serenity of its own.
Yeah, I have done that. Not with this podcast, but with a couple of other podcasts before I launched this one, going out in nature and hiking and just listening to those messages. I remember one in 2020, just listening to it. It was right after my grandpa had died. He was 103, just shy of 104. And the topic was really emotional, and I was just out on this nature hike and pulled up by some rocks and just had a good cry. And it was just so cathartic and different than listening to something while I'm working, and just being out in nature and listening. It was really cool.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Jason, I've been having to travel a lot for work, and the podcasts have been so helpful.
Awesome.
And I'm sure for many, many others, like it must take an immense amount of work. And I'm so grateful. And Andrea, I haven't heard all of that before. And I was welled up with tears because I could relate to so much of your story. I'll connect with you later on that. It was very, very, very powerful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So before closing out, Andrew, is there anything else that you would like to add for this episode?
No, it's just been a pleasure to be here and had this opportunity. And I'm definitely looking forward to even maybe coming along again in the future and sharing even more experience, strength, and hope. So
definitely,
it's definitely a journey, and I'm looking forward to it, you know?
Well, fantastic. I thank you so much for your service here. I know sharing stuff like that, it can be difficult, but the more we put this type of stuff out into the world, the easier it is to break the stigma that we have in this addiction. It is a hard one to talk about in the public, but the more stories that we hear like yours, it really humanizes us and gives us a chance to recover. So I'm super grateful for you joining me, and everyone else that was here for support. It was super awesome. I usually don't do something like this. This is kind of the cross between a meeting and a group chat, but this has been a blast. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Jason, and we'll keep in touch, brother.
All right. Sounds good, Andrew. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Many thanks to Andrew and everyone who joined to hear his first step. And I will be providing links in the show notes for the Fellow Travelers website, which has meeting information, resources, and third-party links. And again, that website is ftrecovery.org. And I will also be sharing the SLAA retreat information that they talked about. It looks like slaadvi.org/activities. And again, I will have the links for that in the show notes as well. And some quick information about the upcoming podcast schedule. I mentioned a few weeks ago that I will be going camping for the first week of October, and I am so looking forward to some well-needed time off work to enjoy nature and my upcoming wedding anniversary. And with that, I will probably be putting out the next episode of the podcast in the second week of October, which will be a recording of an Experience, Strength, and Hope share from the noon meetings that we recorded a few weeks ago. I also got a request from a friend to share more of the AA historians/speakers, Joe and Charlie. Previously, I had split their talk on Step 4 into 4 episodes of the podcast. And over the next few weeks, I'll be looking at which section of their Big Book Comes Alive recordings to share next on the podcast. And since it's taken so long for me to get this episode recorded and edited, I am going to be closing out this episode, and I'll save any feedback that we received for a future episode. If you did wish to provide feedback for the podcast, you can email us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com, or you can email me directly at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com if you wish to be a future guest on the podcast or have any other questions. I have been emailing a few other people about being guests. I just haven't gotten them scheduled in. And as noted, I will start scheduling those in probably in the middle of October. I thank you so much for tuning in this week. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.